The winter night in the Wild West was cruel and silent, with only the sharp whistle of the wind cutting across the wide open plains. Snow had been falling since the afternoon, covering the ground in a thick white blanket. The air was so cold that every breath turned into a pale cloud. Jack Morton sat inside his small canvas tent, close to the fire he had built, rubbing his hands to keep the feeling in his fingers. He was used to hard nights. He had been a scout, a trapper, and a wanderer for most of his life, but even for him, the storm felt unforgiving. Jack had chosen to camp near the foothills, where the land dipped low, hoping the rocks would block some of the wind. His horse was tied outside, stomping nervously in the snow. The fire crackled softly as he sipped from a tin cup of weak coffee. He thought it would be another lonely night on the frontier, one of many in a life that seemed endless and empty. But then something moved outside his tent. At first, Jack thought it was just the shadows or the branches shaking in the wind. But then he heard the crunch of footsteps on snow, slow and cautious. His hand went instinctively to the revolver lying beside him. In the Wild West, a man who ignored strange noises often did not live to regret it. He sat very still, listening. The steps grew closer until he saw the outline of a figure standing at the edge of the firelight. Jack pulled back the tent flap, ready to defend himself if needed. To his surprise, it was not a bandit, nor a soldier, nor even a man. It was a girl, no older than 17 or 18, wrapped in a worn blanket, her long black hair dusted with snow. Her face was thin, her eyes dark and sharp, and though her lips trembled from the cold, she did not beg or cry. She stood tall, like someone used to enduring hardship. Jack could tell immediately she was Apache. The sight made him tense. For years, settlers and Apache tribes had been in conflict. Jack himself had seen raids, fights, and mistrust on both sides. He had also seen cruelty, injustice, and misunderstandings that led to bloodshed. He knew well that an Apache girl wandering alone in a storm was not something simple. There had to be a story behind it. The girl did not move closer at first. She just stood there, watching him, as if weighing whether to trust him. Jack felt the sharp wind blow through the tent opening, biting at his face, and he realized she must be freezing. She had no gloves, only a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Despite his caution, Jack could not turn her away. "Come in," he said in a steady voice, though he kept one hand near his revolver. The girl hesitated, then ducked inside the tent. The warmth of the fire touched her cheeks, but she did not sit down. She kept standing, her eyes moving over everything. The rifle leaning against the canvas wall, the pack of supplies in the corner, the saddle near the flap. Jack noticed this and felt a prickle of unease. She wasn't just looking around. She was studying, memorizing. Still, he reached for his pot of coffee and poured a little into a tin cup. He held it out to her. "Here, warm yourself." She accepted it with both hands, holding it close like it was a treasure, but she did not drink immediately. Her eyes flicked to him, then to the flames. Finally, she sipped, and Jack could see the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked, the wind howled outside, and the horse whinnied against the cold. Jack studied her carefully. She had the look of someone who had been walking for hours, maybe days. Her moccasins were worn thin, and her feet trembled as though she could hardly stand. He wondered if she had been separated from her people, or if something worse had happened. "Storm's not letting up any time soon," Jack said, trying to break the silence. "You can stay till morning. Safer than freezing out there." The girl glanced at him but gave no reply. Her eyes were sharp, watchful, like those of a hawk. Jack realized she understood more than she wanted to admit, but she was keeping her thoughts to herself. He leaned back, stroking his chin. "You're a long way from camp. Where are your people?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the fire, silent as stone. Jack sighed. He had dealt with silence before. He knew when words were wasted, but deep inside he wondered, why was she here? An Apache girl alone, walking through a storm at night, appearing at his tent as if out of nowhere. He thought of old stories he had heard among soldiers and scouts, stories of decoys, of runaways used to lure men into traps. His instincts told him to stay sharp. Still, as the minutes passed, he could not help but feel pity. She was just a girl, shivering in a stranger's tent, far from safety. Maybe she had her secrets, but she was also human. He pushed the fire higher with another log, filling the tent with warmth. "Sit down. Rest. You'll fall over if you keep standing." This time she obeyed, lowering herself near the flames. She stretched her hands toward the light, and Jack noticed faint scars along her fingers, the kind that came from work and hardship. Whoever she was, she had not lived an easy life. Jack leaned back against his saddle, pretending to rest, but his mind was alert. He thought about his own past, about long rides as a scout for the army, about fights where he barely lived to tell the tale, about nights when he too had been cold and desperate. He had seen men betray, and he had seen men show kindness. He wondered which kind of man he would be remembered as. The storm outside raged on, but inside the tent, a strange quiet settled. Two people from different worlds sitting by the same fire, each studying the other. Jack thought he had taken in a lost girl who only wanted warmth, but the way her eyes glimmered in the firelight, sharp and calculating, told him there was more to the story than that. The Wild West had taught Jack one thing above all else: nothing ever happened by accident. And tonight, he felt, was only the beginning of something far larger than he could yet see. The night dragged on slowly. The fire inside the tent gave some warmth, but the wind outside rattled the canvas like angry hands trying to tear it apart. Jack sat with his back against his saddle, his revolver resting near his leg, his eyes half closed yet sharp. He had learned the art of pretending to be at ease while staying ready for anything. The Apache girl, wrapped in her thin blanket, sat near the flames. She hardly moved, except to sip from the tin cup now and then. Jack studied her quietly. Her face was young but serious, far too serious for someone her age. She was not like a frightened child who stumbled into the wrong camp. No, her calmness in the middle of danger told him she had seen much in her short life. She carried herself with quiet strength, as though she was hiding something important. When the fire popped, Jack leaned forward. "Storm's not giving up. Looks like we're stuck here for a while." The girl looked at him, her eyes dark as midnight, then looked back at the fire. She still said nothing. Jack exhaled slowly. "You got a name?" No reply. "You understand me, don't you?" He pressed, keeping his voice calm. Her eyes flickered for a moment. She gave the faintest nod before lowering her gaze. Jack rubbed his jaw. At least she understood English. That was a start. "I'm Jack Morton. Used to ride as a scout. I'm heading west looking for work." He spoke as though he were talking to himself, but his eyes stayed on her, waiting to see if his words would stir a reaction. The girl tightened the blanket around her shoulders but kept silent. Jack leaned back again. He wasn't angry. Silence could mean many things: fear, caution, mistrust. Out here, people learned early not to reveal more than they had to. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling she wasn't just cautious, she was calculating. Every glance of her eyes, every shift of her shoulders seemed like part of a careful plan. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "Why are you here?" The sudden words caught Jack by surprise. He raised his brows. "I told you, I'm just passing through, following the trails west." Her eyes narrowed. "These are not your lands." Jack gave a dry chuckle. "That much is true. But the railroad keeps pushing west, and men like me get sent to scout paths. The world changes whether we like it or not." The girl frowned as if weighing his answer. Then she shifted closer to the fire. Her movements were light, quiet, controlled. Jack noticed how her eyes traveled the tent again, the rifle leaning against the wall, the knife near his saddle, the supplies in the corner. She wasn't just curious. She was studying everything as if making a map in her mind. Jack's instincts sharpened. He had seen this look before, back when he rode with scouts and soldiers. He had seen captives pretend to be helpless, only to slip away in the night with stolen weapons. He had seen young warriors sent to spy before an attack. He couldn't help but wonder, was this girl truly alone, or was she the eyes of someone waiting outside? He decided to test her. "You're a long way from your people. Why come here?" Her lips tightened. She didn't answer right away, but after a moment she said, "The storm chased me. I saw your fire." It was believable enough, yet Jack felt the weight of her words. Something in her tone suggested there was more. He leaned closer, speaking low. If you wanted warmth, you could have built your own fire. This time she met his gaze directly. Not when enemies are near. The words hung heavy between them. Jack's grip on his revolver tightened ever so slightly. Enemies. Was she talking about settlers, soldiers, or perhaps her own people? He had no way of knowing, but the way she said it made his skin prickle. The fire burned lower. Jack fed another log into the flames, watching her carefully. You're running from someone. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Jack shook his head slowly. I don't know your story, girl, but I do know one thing. Storms don't drive people to strangers' tents unless something bigger is chasing them. She turned her eyes away, but her silence was answer enough. Hours passed. Jack closed his eyes, pretending to rest, but his ears stayed sharp to every sound. The storm outside began to weaken. The wind softened and the snow fell more lightly. The night grew calmer, but inside the tent, tension thickened. Sometime after midnight, Jack stirred at a faint noise. It wasn't the wind, nor the crackle of fire. It was soft, like the scrape of leather against snow. His eyes shot open. He didn't move at first, only listened. The sound came again, outside, close to the tent. His hand slid silently to his revolver. He glanced at the girl. She hadn't moved. She sat with her back to the fire, staring at the tent flap. Her body was tense, her shoulders stiff. She had heard it too. Jack's mind raced. Had she led others here? Was she the bait for an ambush? Or was she just as threatened as he was? He couldn't tell. The noises grew clearer. Whispers, the crunch of steps, the faint twang of a bowstring being drawn. Jack knew that sound all too well. His heartbeat quickened, but his face remained calm. He had lived through ambushes before. The key was patience. The girl turned slightly toward him, her dark eyes shining with something he couldn't read, fear, guilt, or warning. Jack didn't know which. He gave her the smallest nod as if to say, I hear it too. The firelight flickered against the canvas walls. Outside, the storm had given way to silence, a silence broken only by the presence of unseen figures moving in the dark. Jack's fingers tightened on his revolver. The night was no longer about survival from the cold. It was about surviving what was coming next. And deep inside, he realized something important. The girl wasn't there by chance. She was part of a larger story, one he had just stepped into without knowing it. The night had grown quiet, too quiet for Jack's liking. The storm that had hidden all sounds before had now passed, leaving only a strange stillness. He knew that stillness well. It was the kind that came just before danger. Jack's hand rested on his revolver as he kept his body still, his breathing steady, his ears open. He did not want to alarm the girl too quickly, but he knew he couldn't ignore what he had heard outside. The Apache girl sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. She hadn't moved since the whispers and footsteps started circling the tent. She seemed to be waiting, as though she already knew what was about to happen. Jack studied her carefully. There was no panic in her face, no wide-eyed fear. Instead, there was a sharp focus, like someone trained to expect trouble. Jack thought back to the days when he rode as a scout, with the army. He had learned to tell the difference between harmless sounds in the night and the deliberate movements of men hunting in the dark. The crunch of boots in snow, the soft hiss of whispers, the tension in the air, it all told him the truth. They were surrounded. Slowly, Jack shifted his body so that his back pressed against the canvas wall of the tent, giving him a view of both the girl and the entrance. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. There are men outside. The girl finally turned her head to him. Her lips parted as though she might speak, but then she closed them again. Her silence was an answer in itself, she knew. Jack narrowed his eyes. Did you bring them here? His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of suspicion. The girl didn't flinch. She held his gaze for a long moment before finally whispering, Not my people. Her words struck him. He wanted to believe her, but doubt clung to his mind like smoke. He had seen too many tricks on the frontier, too many false faces. But before he could press her further, the tent flap shifted slightly, a shadow crossing over it. In one smooth motion, Jack drew his revolver. The world seemed to freeze for a moment, then burst into chaos. The flap ripped open and a figure lunged inside with a knife gleaming in the firelight. Jack fired instantly, the gunshot echoing like thunder in the still night. The attacker dropped, but more shadows moved outside. The horse tied nearby screamed and pulled at its reins, spooked by the sudden violence. Jack sprang to his feet, aiming at the shifting outlines outside the tent. Another figure rushed in, bow drawn. Before Jack could react, the girl leapt forward with startling speed. From beneath her blanket, she drew a hidden knife and slashed at the intruder, forcing him back. The bowstring snapped as the man stumbled, his weapon useless. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. He had been ready to suspect her of betrayal. But here she was, fighting by his side. Her movements were sharp and practiced. Not the flailing of someone unskilled, but the deliberate strikes of someone trained to survive. "Stay down," Jack barked, firing again through the tent flap. Another attacker cried out and fell. The girl ignored his command, spinning toward the shadows at the entrance. She crouched low, her knife glinting as she prepared for the next strike. Her breathing was steady, her eyes fierce. Jack realized she was not just some lost wanderer. She was a fighter. More figures circled outside, shouting in a language Jack couldn't fully understand. He heard the crunch of snow, the thud of feet running in the darkness. He fired 2 more shots, forcing them to scatter. But he knew ammunition was precious. He couldn't waste it all in blind shooting. The girl moved closer to him, her back nearly touching his. She whispered, "They will not stop. They want me." Jack's mind raced. They want her? That changed everything. She wasn't a decoy. She was the target. Whoever these men were, they weren't here for him. They were here for her. The firelight flickered wildly as the tent swayed from the rush of movement outside. Jack's instincts screamed at him to act fast. He grabbed the girl's arm firmly. "We can't stay in here. They'll burn us out or cut us down." She nodded without hesitation, as if she had already come to the same conclusion. Jack kicked over the fire, scattering the burning logs. The tent filled with smoke and shadows, confusing the attackers peering in. Then, with his revolver in one hand and his free arm shielding the girl, Jack shoved through the back of the tent, tearing the canvas with his knife. The cold night air slammed into them as they tumbled into the snow. Jack pulled the girl close, keeping her low to the ground. Shots and arrows hissed past, some striking the canvas behind them. He fired back blindly, giving them cover. The horse, wild-eyed and panicked, fought against its rope. Jack lunged for it, cutting the reins with his knife. The animal reared, nearly knocking him over, but he grabbed the saddle and swung himself up. "Get on," he shouted to the girl. Without question, she climbed up behind him, her small frame pressing against his back. He spurred the horse hard and they bolted into the darkness. Snow sprayed beneath the hooves as they thundered across the frozen ground. Behind them, angry shouts rose. Figures gave chase, their torches glowing like angry fireflies in the distance. Jack leaned low over the horse's neck, urging it faster. His breath came in sharp bursts, but his mind was clear. Survival now depended on speed and skill. The girl clung tightly, her face hidden against his coat, but her knife was still in her hand. Even while riding, she was ready to fight if needed. They rode hard until the glow of the attackers' torches faded behind them. Only then did Jack slow the horse, guiding it into a cluster of rocks where they could hide. His heart pounded as he finally brought the animal to a stop. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the horse's labored breathing and the whisper of wind through the stones. Finally, Jack turned his head slightly. "You fought beside me." The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. "You saved my life back there." His voice was rough, filled with equal parts gratitude and confusion. "Now you're going to tell me why they want you." The girl's dark eyes met his, shining with both defiance and sorrow. She took a deep breath, then whispered, "Because of who I am." Jack studied her silently. The night was far from over, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary girl. Whatever secret she carried, it was valuable enough to risk lives for. And Jack knew, whether he liked it or not, he had just been pulled into her dangerous story. The ride through the night had left both Jack and the girl weary, but stopping had not been an option until now. The horse stood trembling in the shelter of the rocks, steam rising from its body as it breathed hard into the cold air. Jack slid down first, revolver still in hand, scanning the shadows for movement. The moon had come out, pale and thin, shining across the snowy plain. No torches flickered behind them. For the moment, they were safe. He turned to help the girl down. She landed lightly, her bare feet sinking into the snow. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, but her eyes burned with the same sharpness as before. Jack saw no fear there. She was tired, yes, but strong. Jack leaned against a rock, breathing heavily. His voice came low and rough. "I think it's time you told me the truth." The girl looked at him steadily as though she had been waiting for this moment. She stayed silent for a long while, her breath clouding in the cold. Finally she spoke. "My name is Nayeli." Jack repeated the name softly, letting it settle. "Nayeli, that's a strong name." She nodded, lifting her chin slightly. "My father is a chief, a leader of my people. The men you saw tonight, they are not his warriors. They belong to another band, a rival. They want me because they think they can use me." Jack's jaw tightened. So it was true. She wasn't just a wandering girl. She was someone important, someone valuable enough for men to hunt through the night. "Use you how?" he asked. Her voice grew colder. "To force my father's hand, to make him surrender land, to weaken him in front of others. If they take me, he will have no choice but to give them what they demand." Jack cursed under his breath. He had seen this kind of cruelty before. Families torn apart, hostages taken, lives traded for power. The frontier was full of men who used others like pawns. He studied Nayeli again. She sat tall despite the cold, her young face calm but fierce. She was no ordinary girl caught in a storm. She was the key to something much larger. Jack ran a hand over his face, thinking, "So when you came to my tent, you weren't running from me. You were running from them." Nayeli gave a small nod. "I thought your fire might hide me, but they were already close. I did not mean to bring them upon you." Jack let out a low laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Well, they didn't seem too happy to see me either. I reckon they would have killed us both if they had the chance." Nayeli's eyes softened for the first time. "You fought for me." Jack shook his head. "I fought to stay alive. But you fought for me too. You didn't have to." Her lips pressed together and she looked away. Jack realized she wasn't used to being thanked. The silence stretched. Jack finally broke it. "What's your plan now?" Nayeli lifted her head, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "I must return to my people. If I don't, they will think I am lost. My father will be weakened. The others will gain strength." Jack thought about her words. The land was dangerous, crawling with enemies. She might be brave, but she couldn't make the journey alone. He rubbed his temples. He had never wanted to be caught in the middle of tribal rivalries, not again. He had seen too much blood spilled already. Yet here he was, standing beside the daughter of a chief, knowing that leaving her behind would mean sending her to her death. "You'll never make it alone," he said finally. "Those men will be tracking you. And if you're caught—" He let the words hang. Nayeli looked at him directly. "Then you will guide me." Jack blinked. The way she said it wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in quiet certainty. He almost laughed. "Do I look like someone's hired guide?" "You are alive," she said simply. "You know how to fight. You know the land." "That is enough." Jack studied her long and hard. She reminded him of someone he once knew, someone who refused to bend even when the odds were impossible. He felt a tug inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. He sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, Nayeli. I'll get you back to your people. But you listen close, we'll have to move fast and quiet. No fires, no rest until we're clear. Understand?" She nodded firmly. Jack mounted his horse again and pulled her up behind him. As they rode out from the shelter of the rocks, the moon lit their path. Jack kept his eyes sharp, his ears straining for the faintest sign of pursuit. The night stretched on, filled with the steady rhythm of hooves on snow. Hours passed before Jack slowed the horse at a stream hidden between cliffs. He let the animal drink, then crouched low to study the ground. His heart sank, tracks fresh ones. The rival warband was still following. Nayeli crouched beside him, her eyes narrowing as she examined the prints. "They are close," Jack nodded grimly. "Closer than I'd like." He rose, brushing snow off his hands. "This won't be easy. They know these lands as well as you do, but I've got a few tricks of my own." They set off again, this time leaving false trails, doubling back, crossing the stream to hide their tracks, weaving through rocky paths. Jack's years as a scout served him well. Still, he knew their enemies wouldn't give up easily. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with pale pink light, Jack and Nayeli finally stopped in a hidden grove. Jack built no fire, only let the horse graze while they sat in the shadows. Both were exhausted, but neither allowed sleep to take them fully. Jack broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me sooner who you were?" Naomi's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Because I did not know if you could be trusted. Many white men have taken our trust and used it against us, but you did not leave me. You fought beside me. That is why I speak now." Her words sank deep into Jack. He had lived his life drifting, never belonging fully to one side or the other. Yet somehow in this frozen wilderness a young girl had chosen to trust him. He leaned back against a tree, watching her carefully. "Well, Naomi, I reckon we're both in this now, whether we like it or not." She gave him the faintest smile, the first he had seen on her face. It was brief, but it carried a warmth that even the cold morning could not steal away. Jack looked away quickly, hiding the strange feelings stirring in his chest. The Wild West had a way of turning strangers into allies overnight, and sometimes allies into something more. But for now, there was only one truth. He had promised to see her safely home. And Jack Morton was not a man who broke promises. The pale light of dawn spread across the horizon, pushing away the darkness of night. Jack Morton and Naomi sat quietly in the grove where they had rested, both alert despite their exhaustion. The horse grazed nearby, shaking snow from its mane. The air was sharp and cold, every breath turning white in the morning air. Jack leaned against a tree, his revolver resting across his lap, eyes fixed on the distance. He had not slept more than a few minutes. His mind kept returning to the sound of footsteps in the snow, the shouts in the night, and the fierce fight that had broken out by his tent. Now everything hinged on one promise: getting Naomi back to her people alive. Naomi sat across from him, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. She had not slept either, though her face showed no weakness. Her dark eyes remained steady, scanning the horizon with the same focus Jack had seen since the moment she walked into his camp. She had the heart of someone older, someone who carried the weight of more than her own life. At last, Jack broke the silence. "We'll have to ride hard today. If those men are still following, they won't stop until they've caught us." Naomi nodded. "They will not give up easily. They know what I am worth." Her words struck Jack again. She spoke not with pride, but with a deep understanding of the danger she carried. She was the daughter of a chief, a symbol of power and hope for her people. Her capture could mean disaster. Jack saddled the horse and helped her up before swinging into the saddle himself. They rode out from the grove, the cold wind stinging their faces. The land stretched wide before them, rolling hills, frozen rivers, and patches of dark forest. Jack steered them toward the east, where Naomi had told him her people were camped. The hours passed slowly. The sound of hooves echoed through the snow, steady and rhythmic. Jack kept scanning the land behind them, his eyes sharp for movement. At first the horizon was clear, but as the sun rose higher he spotted something far off, dark specks moving across the white plain. His jaw tightened. "They're still on us." Naomi twisted to look. Her eyes narrowed. "Yes, they come fast," Jack cursed under his breath. He had hoped the false trails would throw them off, but the war band was relentless. They knew the land, and they knew who they were chasing. He pushed the horse harder. Snow sprayed up as they galloped across the plain. The wind whipped against them, freezing their faces, but there was no choice but to keep moving. As the day wore on, Jack searched for an advantage, somewhere they could hold their ground if the warband caught up. Finally, near the bend of a wide river, he saw it, a cluster of rocky bluffs rising from the snow. The cliffs created a natural choke point, with the river blocking one side and the rocks guarding the other. "This is it," Jack muttered. "We'll make our stand here." He pulled the horse into the shelter of the rocks and dismounted. Naomi jumped down beside him, her knife already in hand. She looked around quickly, understanding at once what Jack intended. "They will come soon," she said. Jack checked his revolver. He had only a handful of bullets left. His rifle held a few more, but ammunition was running low. He glanced at Naomi, small but fierce, her knife flashing in the cold light. They were outnumbered, outarmed, but not out of fight. The first shouts came minutes later. Dark shapes appeared on the ridge, torches burning in their hands. The warband had found them. They fanned out across the snow, closing in from every direction. Jack steadied his breathing. "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." Naomi nodded, her face set with quiet determination. The warband charged. Arrows hissed through the air. Jack fired his rifle, the shot echoing against the cliffs. One attacker fell, but more came rushing forward. The sound of battle filled the air. Shouts, hooves, the crack of gunfire, the clash of steel. Nayeli moved like a shadow beside him, her knife flashing as she fended off a warrior who lunged too close. She was swift and precise, her movements born of training and instinct. Jack fired again, then drew his revolver as two more men closed in. The blast lit up the snow and another fell. Still, the warband pressed harder. Jack's horse reared and kicked, scattering a few attackers, but the enemy circled like wolves. The fight dragged on, each moment more desperate than the last. At one point, Jack stumbled, nearly knocked to the ground by a blow. Before he could recover, a warrior raised his weapon above him. But Nayeli was there in an instant, striking fiercely with her knife. The man fell back wounded. Jack scrambled to his feet, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment. In that instant, he knew she was not just a girl he had chosen to protect. She was his partner in this fight. The battle raged on until at last, the warband began to falter. Jack's bullets had found their mark and Nayeli's blade had driven back those who dared to come close. The ground was scarred with tracks, the snow stained from the struggle. At last the survivors pulled back, retreating into the distance with angry shouts. Jack stood breathing hard, his revolver smoking in his hand. Nayeli leaned on her knife, her chest rising and falling quickly. The air was filled with the echo of fading footsteps as the enemy disappeared beyond the hills. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply stood together in the silence that followed, their breaths white against the cold. Finally, Jack lowered his revolver. Looks like they've had enough for now. Nayeli wiped her blade clean on the snow. Her eyes met his, steady and calm. You fought with honor. Jack gave a tired chuckle. You didn't do so bad yourself. The horse stood nearby, trembling but alive. Jack patted its neck, whispering softly to calm it. Then he turned back to Nayeli. Come on, we're not far now. The rest of the journey passed in weary silence. The land grew more familiar to Nayeli, and at last smoke rose in the distance, a camp hidden in the folds of the valley. Her people. When they arrived, the camp stirred with life. Warriors came forward, weapons ready until they saw Nayeli. A cry of joy rose up, and she was surrounded by her people. An older man stepped forward, tall and proud, his face lined with years of leadership. His eyes softened when they fell on Nayeli. My daughter, he said in their tongue, gathering her into his arms. Jack watched quietly from his horse, his heart easing as he saw the reunion. Nayeli's face lit with relief and joy, emotions she had hidden through every trial of their journey. She had made it home. The chief turned to Jack, his eyes measuring him carefully. Then he gave a slow nod of respect. No words were needed. The nod was enough. Jack touched his hat and turned his horse. He did not wait for thanks or reward. His duty was done. As he rode away, the sounds of the camp faded behind him. The wide, open land stretched ahead once more. Jack felt the weight of the night's battles pressing on him, but he also felt something else, a strange warmth in his chest. He had started the night as a man alone, weary of the world. Now he carried the memory of a girl who had shown him courage, trust, and the will to fight beside him. The Wild West was a land of endless trials, a place where men and women were tested beyond measure. Jack Morton knew one truth as he rode into the horizon. Sometimes the people we least expect can change the course of our lives forever.